We're not going to go over them in great detail at all, but we are going to give you some insights into how you might use a conversation map as a tool going forward, because some of you are facilitators in your own jobs, and so it's worth hearing about. Then we have 2 group activities that we're going to try and do, depending upon where you are in your action plan process. We're going to make it possible for those of you who are ready to go and are already well down the path of thinking about their action plan and are happy to go work on it on your own time, time to delve deeper into metrics policies, have a Q&A session with John. So he's going to be available to answer a myriad of questions that you can ask. I dare you, drill him. And then the action plan template, we've created a template. We have an action plan from somebody in our, thank you, for Kathy, for somebody on our team here who let us look at hers so people can get ideas for those of you who need to see a template. And then Nancy and I are going to offer ourselves up as resources, and we're going to invite you to also break into groups if you want to. We'll do it in 2 groups. So Nancy's happy to talk about marketing, anything that has to do with that. And I'm happy to talk about metrics and measurements, anything that has to do with that. And anything between, we'll flip a coin. So that's kind of where we are with that. So that's how your evening's going to flow.
Thanks to Laura Lee for inviting me. Thanks to Constance for making this happen. I was asked to say some things about myself. I started out as a child. I was born in the Miners Hospital. That's Miners with an E. My mother's Midwest. My mother's brothers were coal miners. My father's father was a hoisting engineer, which runs the cage up and down in deep shaft coal mines. So I come from bituminous coal country. That'll become relevant when we start talking about policy and the impact of policy. I have a colleague at Notre Dame de Namur University where I'm serving as an interim dean, which is why I rolled in from Belmont. And he comes from anthracite and so we have these Pennsylvania versus Illinois debates about. But if you know about policy, you know how that debate ends up. So that's relevant. The issue primarily for me as I was growing up was to see slow and fast consequences. Fast consequences, there were mine explosions, mine cave-ins. One was so large they had to put everybody in the school gymnasium to lay them out because there weren't enough funeral homes. Slow consequences, black lung listed as a cause of death on certificates for most miners. Also, there was a lot of wildcatting. There were people who would come through to speculate on oil, and they would go into sort of farmland and ask people, may we drill? And people would think, well, that looks like a lot of money, but then nothing ever grew there again. And so I grew up seeing this. One of the things that I've done at Dominican through the years has been teach mediation, and I've had my own little business doing mediation. And I trained most of the mediators in Alaska through the years, and when the Exxon Valdez oil spill came, they did most of the mediating for the Native Peoples Corporations and the small islands. And so that was, then I sort of was backup for some of that. So I have that long-standing interest from being a kid in coal country to professional interests. Last time I taught this course, Metrics, Advocacy, and Social Policy, that I put together for the Green MBA. The students have a community engagement part to that. They go out and they do things in the community. And one of the teams in the MAP course won an environmental award in Silicon Valley for the kind of work they did in the class. So we're very engaged and hands-on, and I think that this is another example of the sort of thing that we can do. I did do my homework. I went up on your website and looked at your climate plan, and I sort of thought about some of the issues in terms of what's happening now. So I want to say a little bit about policy. That's sort of the piece that I want to share with you. Then a little bit about technique for making policy. I've written law books. It's just happens occasionally. And one of the things that you'll see is that there are folks who sort of report on things, and there's folks who go out and write laws, write regs, and make things happen. File lawsuits, go to board meetings. Let's be some of those. Let's do some of that. And so that's a sort of technique that I'll be talking about tonight. The federal and state handshake is interesting. And of course, if we know about global issues, we think, well, even that's insufficient. But I'll talk a little bit about the fact that even when people talk about state policy, they often mean federal. So one example is federal law has to do with federal law and state implementation plans. And those are usually known by their acronym of SIP, which probably makes you think it's water policy, but it's not. It's air policy. So let us sip for a moment. And this comes to us, this is a recent piece that I recommend to you, and I will get the site to Laura Lee. This is Helen King, who's a professor of law and director of the Environmental Law and Justice Clinic at Golden Gate School of Law. So this is a very recent piece, and she's talking about navigating environmental regulations. So how exactly does that work, particularly with state implementation plans? So even if somebody says state, it's usually really federal, and that's a big deal. Plans have to be written, submitted to the Environmental Protection Agency, approved, and the reason that that's important is that the word plan is kind of misleading. This is actually enforceable by the government and by citizens. So it's important to know these, and there is a website that covers these, which I'll make available to you, that has the SIPs. How many California SIPs do you think we have? Not root beer, not...
What does SIP stand for?
The SIP, what does SIP stand for, again? Yes, there we're making progress. State implementation plans, SIP. And so you're a knowledgeable crowd, and so I'm really interested to know, if a guesstimate, it's not like we're being recorded. How many...
I'd say probably a couple hundred at least.
Couple hundred, what did I hear over here?
1,436.
Yeah, 1,436. 35, which means you could probably figure those out. I thought it was. So that means it's something we could know, 35. And this has to do particularly with EPA Region 9. So as you know, you can see I'm now going from the general to the Pacific. I know whenever I spend an evening in search of knowledge, I want to know what exactly has had to do with me and where I lurk. So I want to pay you that respect as well. The idea is that if you get into a sort of contest about are people enforcing this or is it being done or not, for example, the Bay Area Quality Management District, you will still end up relating it to the feds. So a sort of one of our first generalizations, which I'll take exception to immediately in the next line, but one of our first generalizations is think federal. And the reason that's good, well, let me ask you, I've always wondered, why is that good? Why would a federal approach be good? What's useful about a federal approach?
Same all over the country.
Yes, so there's certain uniformity, and people don't have to, and that's going to be very important whenever we do our exercise and sort of what's this mean for Benicia, because there's a fancy term called leakage, that if you make a rule here, people may go there. Because we have 58 fights in California, 58 counties, you'll see people just go to another county to sort of fishtail away. So this is important for the business sorts of thing. By the way, I was very impressed, as Laura Lee mentioned. I did. She sent those. I'm very intrigued by your business plans, and I've got a little bit of a notion about one of my favorite guilty pleasure books about this, and I'm trying to relate to some of your, because you folks have potential. That's what I think. Pretty convinced that you do. Laura Lee she did tell me, but I like documentation. That's sort of where I go to that. Now, that's the good news. Now, the not so good news, depending on what role you're in, is that California laws allow companies who admit to violating, in this case, air pollution laws, to obtain a variance. Well, John, you just went through all this and waved your arms, and what good is it? Remember the word I said before, not boring, that will occur to you on your own. Federal. There's no federal easement of that sort. There's no federal variance. So anytime there's a federal law, go upstream and look for the federal variation and federal law, and there is no legal variation. And that's important for the kind of advocacy that we do.
I don't understand.
Oh, well, people say, well, okay, we're literally dirty. We're polluting the air, but we're going to go get a variance that says it's okay for us to do so. And then state law will back us. And that's true. That's possible to do. But there is no such option for federal law.
Oh, I see, okay,
And
so
so-
you're only talking about there's a variance for state laws.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. As Professor King tells us, these are creatures of state law. And then creatures may be unfair to creatures. So one of the things that we see is that even if people it's being neglected, even if they get a state okay, they can still be sued under federal law. Now, I would much prefer to see alternative policies, and I sort of believe that living well is the best revenge. And so I'm not all about people filing briefs, but we will talk in just a bit about friend of the court briefs, and occasionally, as I have reason to believe some of you have knowledge of, occasionally lawsuits may be one weapon in this sort of arsenal. So the reason federalism is good is otherwise we have a race to the bottom. People will go to places, sort of forum shopping. Where can I find a place where they won't, in fact, be concerned about these rules? And then as we know, and the reason I'm using air right now, but it applies to lots of other things, is that if the air is polluted elsewhere, it doesn't respect state boundaries. And here we are. And of course, we know that's true of water, it's true of a number of the things that we deal with. So that's probably more than you want to know about SIPs. But it is an interesting mechanism to first think federal if you're looking for some kind of enforceability. So now that you've got that and you remembered that, let me now say, but that's not always so. So one of the laws that has the most publicity is AB 32. We all know it. I read it aloud in the evenings before retiring. And yet, and this is one of the reasons it's important to have graduate students. I say graduate because they don't always finish on time, but mine always do finish, is they often write regs. And we're going to talk in here a good deal about regs. I started with talking about regs. So anybody recall, when did AB 32 pass?
92, was it? Quite a while ago.
It's a little more recent than that, but
I mean,
it wasn't this year.
2002.
2006, strong running for the door prize, a bowl of candy. 2006, and this is, well, I've been commuting, so you can't talk to me, but I think it's almost 2011. So it's been a while, and yet nothing happened until October 20th. October 20th, like a couple of weeks ago, October 20th. So your timing is good. We can talk about this. Before that, we had nothing. We had the law. People would sort of say, I don't know about the law. What about the law? CARB, which some of you may be watching, but what's that acronym? We're doing acronyms because we're sort of in this for the long haul. This is the California Air Resources Board, CARB. So they approve new regs. So we now have regulations, which mean we now begin to know exactly what AB 32 means. And of course, it's staged because there's these rules that say that we're supposed to reduce our emissions. Well, this is sort of, this would fit on a T-shirt, an organic T-shirt. That I love that book about the travels of a T-shirt. You know, so it kind of goes from West Texas to China and back. That's a good case of what should not happen. So when exactly is AB 32 supposed to happen? What's our goal? Because this is the first of our metric, right? So we have a metric. AB 32 has a metric that some people have sort of thought about. What is it we're trying to do? We're going to reduce to what? We're going to roll back the hands of time, right? So we're going to say that we're going to go back to 1990 levels by 2013. Did I mention it's 2011? So you begin not right away, or it's going to happen really fast, like the high-speed train. No. So it's much in the news, people. So the idea is that there has to be some regs if we're going to get there. Now, some folks say, well, wait a minute, we don't have to really do it by 2013. The regs are going to start in 2013, and we've really got till 2020. But these are people that didn't come to Earth Day at Dominican and hear that the 350.org, the whole notion that in fact sometimes it does take a rocket scientist, and in fact that maybe we don't have until 2020. So maybe we ought to move that up a little bit. And this is another case of laws. It's one of the reasons that I do urge you to consider writing policies and laws and things rather than sort of what's happened to us lately. If you're knowledgeable about it, you care about it, you're going to go to all the trouble to stand up some of these business plans, and I think you should. I like them. I'd use them. If you're going to do that, then you want sustainability also applies to things like building. That's why I like family-owned businesses. I like folks that do things for the long haul. If you're going to go to all this trouble, you don't want to think you're out of business by 2020. So let's make it worth your time in investing. So remember I talked about it's usually federal, and there's a state example. This is completely not true in this case. So this is state only. So we had Fed, and states just sort of implemented and did plans and filled in below. This one's the other way around, and there becomes all of the issues that I sort of rolled through before. So this is much more pervasive than any market-based program has ever been before. It's an issue that will immediately come up with leakage. People saying, well, it's like folks saying, but taxes are too high, so therefore we'll just go across a state line or across a country line. And so the federal approach is much more useful for the kinds of things that we would like to do. And by the way, two prominent attorneys who write in this field, and this is, I take a legal newspaper, not that the others are illegal, but the legal newspaper, the Recorder, and this is this week. This is Robert Lawrence and Dustin Till. This is the San Francisco law offices of Martin Law. So this is very timely. This is dated Monday. So I bring you the new things because I can't find the old things. No, because in our field, things change. And that's one of the issues. We now have the regs we didn't have 2 weeks ago. We now have a pretty good analysis of where the issues are going to come. And this is beginning to set the stage for your exercise, to give you a chance to sort of see how we do this. So what are some things that might come up? Well, leakage, running for the border. That may come up. The phase-in, how quickly are we going to do this? People are going to push back and say, well, I can't do that. What's going to be the impact of businesses? Are they going to close if they don't move? Are they going to reduce operations? And here's one that's relevant, and again, this is where, coming from coal country where there was one big employer, or perhaps being a guest in a town where there's another big employer, one of the things you realize is that there can be resource shuffling. So one of the things that I also want you to address in your exercise is that folks may say, well, we've switched from a high emitting to a low emitting source, but did they shut down the source from which this was really happening? And so this is kind of a bait and switch applied to resources. And that can be subject to criminal penalties. So there's actually some real teeth in this, folks doing what they say they're going to do. Allowances auctions. Well, now we sort of get into some technical issues. Can people have an auction and recover the value of the emissions for the benefit of the public? Then does that work, or does that encourage people paying twice? Are people really willing to do that? Will these auction proceeds be rebated? Can you coordinate with other programs, particularly the Renewable Portfolio Standard? So this is kind of a technical area, but I just wanted to give you a couple of the issues that people say just because the reg's been published, it's sort of like we've only just begun, because now all these issues are going to be sort of pushed back in regs and may in fact be subject to further lawsuits. The other thing that I want to suggest to you, therefore, is that I think the best defense is a good offense. If I were working with you to develop a policy tonight, I would volunteer to draft what we thought we came up with, even though my writing is so bad that my parents often wondered if they had gotten a letter from me. But I would do it anyway. And then I would send it around to each one of you. And I would say, when you find the errors I have made in this or things that have been left out, please make these essential changes. And then I would get it back, and then I would send it out again. And when I send it out again, what's the first thing you would look for when I send it to you the second time? And if you don't see it, what should you do? I should come off your Christmas card list. I should go out of your folder. Just they'll never. Well, you're in fact persistent, and I argue that. But a lot of folks, that's what they look for. In fact, everything is personal, and so to play fair with people, instead of saying, "Well, let's have a meeting," but I'm over here writing what I'm really going to do. Haven't you been in groups like that? You have a feeling that in fact you could have just stayed home because it was already at the printer. Already done. So let's not do that. This is ethically important. So that this is what's called, in fancy terms, I've written about in the mediation book, about the single text procedure, kind of adapted. And we kind of do this until we all can recognize our own thoughts and words in there, and then it's ours. And this is truly collaborative. And this is very different than I'm going to get in a small room and tell you what I should do. And I'm serious about drafting legislation. I used to think, I don't know, with apologies to my Latin teacher, she did the best she could, and I did too. It just didn't work out. There's a lot of sort of fancy language in some legislation. And what nobody told me, until I started writing a law book, is there's legislative drafting bureaus, and you can bring something in holding it like a dead mouse, and they will, in fact, put all those lines and arrows. There's software for this, and so the idea, you can sit with somebody and have coffee or any other beverage of your choice, and you can, in fact, write what you'd like to see happen, and it can be made into the appropriate format and then can be introduced into the appropriate body. And I've taught social worker law for many years, taught in the MBA program. I was thinking of myself being a newbie, and I got one of those 27-year stars, a couple of that. I thought, really must have flown by. I certainly enjoyed it. You mentioned Sister Aquinas. So in fact, an alarming number of those ideas have made their way into law at various levels. So people actually would do this and say, I feel very strongly about this. Well, write it down and let's put it in this format and see what happens. So I'm very serious about this as a way to begin to feel like you do have power and you are making things. Will you get everything? Probably not. But I'd rather have them marking up our document than sort of holding my breath wondering what's going to happen instead. And it is sadly true that in these kinds of matters, if you're not at the table than you are on the menu. And we often feel like we really weren't told. So part of the reason I brought up regs is leveraging the power of regulations. Regulations have tremendous power. People tend not to read them. They're put somewhere for some period of time to elapse, and they actually have much more detail in them than the law. The law might be a page or two. The regs go on and on. So I would encourage you, whether it has to do simply with the areas of business that you're interested in, and I think healthy self-interest is a good thing, as well as the broader field of sustainability that you look to that. I also would encourage you that as you work on these kinds of policies, that you consider presenting them before appropriate boards. This is the part of making it happen. You sort of have to show up. You have to wait for a long time. They tend to do these things, at least they used to, Board of Supervisors where I was, late on a Friday, wait till everybody left. People were afraid to excuse themselves. They're afraid that there would be skated past. So there is a certain amount of persistence involved in this. But I will say that this is the way a lot of policies do get enacted. So it's not enough to write it. You have to figure out what's the appropriate form, what do I want to have happen, and then put it together. And some of these thoughts are in another book that I'm allegedly writing on leading sustainably. And so I have thought about this a good deal and am much encouraged by your business plans. The last thing I want to say about that before we give you a chance to look at that is one of the books, I had these very technical books and technical articles, and then I had a book that I liked, but I thought that my MBA students would probably think was a little bit perhaps obvious or lightweight. And of course it was their favorite, and that's the Getting Green Done book that I wanted to say something about, that it's important to make the business case. This is Schindler's book, and that is called Getting Green Done. And yes?
What's the last word?
Getting Green Done.
Done.
Yeah, done. This is Auden Schindler's book, and this is one small expert to give you a little bit of the fact that it's not only entertaining, but the right point, making a case for sustainable business. So many times people say, well, do it because you ought to. Well, guilt only goes so far. So his argument is, and I read your business plans with these questions in mind, and I would urge you to think about them as you refine those and actually stand them up and make them happen. What are any dollar savings from energy efficiency? Is there any risk reduction, which is a real issue people think about? Are there improved community relations? Is it easier to get projects approved? Here's one that's simple to say and hard to do. Is it an ethical obligation? Is it the right thing to do? Is it really an important issue? In terms of reducing legal liability. Are there folks that are more likely to be attracted to work in this field? Does it change how we behave? Sort of like littering in Canada. People don't do it. Why is that? So one of the things we begin to see that what we may be outliers, early adopters, but not forever, which leads to the strategic vision notion. I mean, the reason that you're here investing this time in this series is you really want to see something happen. And how might that be? Some of you, for example, with the next point, are talking about a better product or a different service. And that's a chance to do good and do well. And now I have to say something in MBA speak. Is there some sort of product differentiation? Is there some sort of brand positioning? So going green has become sufficiently sort of dubious to so important that people are constantly accused of greenwashing, saying, well, we didn't change anything except the rhetoric. So if you really are doing something, let's lead with that. That has become a good thing. And practice making a pitch, because one of the things that happens with this, especially with the business plans that you want to make happen, you may have to go several places, several times. It's really about persistence. And so how to, when you are rejected, as we all are, What did they say? What was it that you started? When did you first lose them? Even if you think they're wrong, would other people think that? Can you anticipate that? So most of your plans, I think, could be constantly refined as you do that. So sort of see it as kind of the way that people will ask folks for consultation, not expect that maybe the first time you get it funded. In fact, I often tell people, if you've got a really good potential source, don't use it. Go somewhere else until you're ready for prime time. And then whenever people have asked you all kinds of questions and things that aren't fair or that they shouldn't have asked, and once you've got all that worked out, then wander in and do it. So knowing when not to do this, I think, is particularly important. So what's my bright idea about an exercise? The CARB regs are new. They have implications specifically for California and specifically for Benicia. As a thought about that, as a takeoff, that or any other policy that you in some small groups would like to address, what would be how the policy would be written? How would it be put together in a way that you could say, yes, I understand how this would look if we got it done? Who would be funding sources? Who has to approve it legally? And now to sort of finish where I began, people said coal, and James Fallows is in the Atlantic talking about this. You can look at it at theatlantic.com, that coal is going to be with us, and folks agree with that. And clean coal, and there's a lot of debates about that. But the reason that where I'm from, nobody is mining coal anymore is because of a law. A law went through that said there are certain standards, and after that it couldn't happen anymore. So that was done through legislation. And it had a tremendous impact and did improve people's health. But, and this is the other part to think about, in short term, it was economically very difficult for that region. And so that's the other thing to think about before people say, well, we've got major employment here, but it's not necessarily what we would choose, but what do we do instead, or how do we improve that? So that's a realistic issue that often people say, well, that's a lovely idea, but what if you get what you think you want? So what is an alternative? So in some ways, kind of an economic piece to that. So thinking about the CARB look, and if you can take off from that and you've got something you'd rather do, what would be a policy that you look at? Would it be leakage? Would there be resource swapping? Would there have to be some sort of auction? Just thinking about those kinds of general notions. And write it down in a way that you think, if I were going to stand up and I got 5 minutes, which is about all the time you get. By the way, folks are asking for a sandwich. Would you like mustard with that? They're out there. I would drive all the way to Sacramento on a hot day, and I would get maybe 5 minutes, and I didn't really have their undivided attention. And it would make you get snappish, except you realize, no, I brought it, I want to have it in the record, I want to say I've done this, and I want to be polite. So think about how you would have a brief sort of policy that you've written in a way that's pretty clear, and think about how it would, in some ways, be more effective if you had to say it. If you actually had to tell somebody about it, especially somebody who had the power to make it happen, but wasn't paying much attention to you, right? Which, of course, is not true of my students, and happily has not been true of you. So thank you very much, and let's go into some small groups, and I look forward to your questions later.
So John, maybe before they break into groups, because we're going to help the group breaking, there's some specific things you wanted to make sure people thought about, right?
Yes, you wish they wouldn't. Because let's do it among friends, right? And sort of rehearse the policy that you've written to see, in fact, how it could be proposed and what questions someone might have. And that's a pretty ambitious for a brief exercise, but it is realistic, and I can guarantee you it's exactly what folks are doing on all sides of AB 32. This is exact. People are sort of thinking, I wonder what this means. I wonder who we should be checking with now. And if we want to make a change, I wonder what it should be, and I wonder who we have to run it by.
John, may I
Constance.
ask you a question? I'm on the Sustainability Commission, Kathy and Ray
Yes.
as well, Mary. And so we have things within our climate action plan that could be related to, there are related to
They are.
gas reduction and emission reduction.
Yes, they are.
California Research Board. So we have one like a strategy to eliminate wood fireplaces.
Yes.
Or to add 2% or more cost to construction. So we've been through that. But if I'm a retail or a commercial business, what's in it for me to advocate a policy?
Well,
Could I advance my business by being on the front edge of something?
I do believe that almost everything is personal, and I know that, for example, whenever we first started seeing issues around logging versus endangered species or Tahoe, I mean, there was some unpleasantness, shall we say. People called nicknames. But something else that's been in the news recently again is asthma levels. And one of the things that people who may in fact enjoy a fireplace themselves and it may be their business, if their child's suddenly diagnosed with asthma, they may have a slightly different view of that. And so some of these things get reframed as not a business issue, but as a public good or a public health issue. And that's in some ways, that's exactly how these clean air issues came to be to begin with. And so as we know more about that, it becomes sort of like climate change in general, but it goes from, look, you know, don't be so delicate and it doesn't matter, and who doesn't like a fire and burning marshmallows. Sorry, I could never roast them. I guess too close, too far. To wait a minute, this is actually doing harm, and people are getting out their inhaler, and it's not going to work. And so that I think is it's only one example, but it's more prevalent. I mean, it's one of the reasons that we see certain parts of California again that have, if you just do a map, and I often look at these in that way, we've got a geographic information systems lab that we look at some of those things, and it's startling to see. And once you've seen that information, you think, oh dear. I mean, it's a child welfare issue in some ways. Different way to think about it. Yes?
And to address the question, I know people that have been in the chemical business, and I know people who've actually been in legal finance business. And what they've told me is they like being on the forefront. They like being in the groups because it's much easier to control how it affects you if you're part of the people writing it, instead of sitting back and getting slammed with something that you had no idea was coming at you.
That's true. And often people will, folks have lots of information. And part of, some of these things are sort of, but not all of them are. And part of the issue, and this is sort of, gets to larger legislative issues that there's no doubt if somebody's made their entire business something that now we're saying that's bad, is there some sort of economic way to sort of make that compensated, or is there something to do about that? Because it is a very real issue. But it's amazing to me and heartening to see how far, often kind of a spiral where this will happen and then there's some backsliding, to see things that folks would not even have tried are now the law of the land, federal law. Over here.
Can I put you on the spot?
That wasn't on the spot? What was that?
Public policy stuff is often about opportunity, right? Unique
Yeah.
circumstances, and
Yeah,
in small places like this,
Right.
it's very difficult to impact, in my experience, to do something that's really effective on an overall policy thing, state, or federal, or national, or whatever. But in this town, we have CODA coming, electric car vehicles being built here. That's
Sort of first flush of ideas, and some of it is very interesting. It probably reveals more about this group than you know, but we won't go deeper into that than we need to. What the next step is normally, if this had been a full drawn-out experience, is we look at the conversation map, and the way that it's often described is you kind of let your eyes sort of do that. I don't know if you do yoga, like do a drishti, that it's sort of, you kind of tune out everything else and let the map speak to you. Because the goal of summarizing what's on the map is not to write, is not to sort of come up with a summary of what each branch is, because that's not really where the interest is in this. It's a system, and what we're looking for is themes that cut across the branches, that keep recurring no matter what topic you go to. So I did a very brief emergence on this, and the two very simple themes, and this is a very simple example, two very simple themes that came up for this, and the theme of this one, this is the Main Street Benicia in 2016, and the two things that came out to me was an interest, was alternative energy, big shock, okay, but various forms of that. So that would be one thing that we might play with either in some kind of deepening exercise, and also testing these potentials of alternative energy against certain future scenarios, because that's what the conversation map is. It's about developing future pictures and then testing them against what may or may not happen. Again, it's sort of drawing out unintended consequences and sort of dealing with risk before it actually happens. So you can do it with pretty circles instead of when it's actually coming at you. So I saw alternative energy, and the other thing which I found actually very interesting was extreme external focus. A lot of focus on people coming to Benicia as opposed to what Benicians wanted or needed in their Main Street of 2016. And I found that very interesting. I'm not sure if something was said or if money. Okay, so that's one possibility. But other communities that we've worked with have tended to be much more insular in their focus and to focus on what their citizens need as opposed to drawing people in. So I just found that it's not good, it's not bad. I just found it a very interesting thing. So what you do then is you play with these scenarios and you try to tease out these themes as you move deeper, and maybe we can do that in future exercises or not, as the case may be. But anyway, so that's basically how you go. And again, so what you're looking for is, does anybody remember the word for the qualities of a system that do not exist in its parts? What do we call that? Oh, no. Emergence, yay, yes. So we're looking for emergent patterns, for things that occur within a system that cannot be derived simply by looking at its individual parts. Very good. So that's basically, we just wanted to sort of refresh your memory to say we have done this and we've transcribed all three now, right, in inspiration.
So I only sent out one, but the other two I will pop up in the Dropbox for you to look at. So you'll have all three, and sometimes you should be looking for what's not on the map. Because what's not on the map sometimes is just as interesting, because there's maybe a reason, a simple one, or maybe there's something worth delving into and probing. And we have also seen situations where you go back to the map. So in one group you go to the map, but maybe don't have all a nice diverse group of stakeholders. Instead, everybody there is the same. So it's a good idea sometimes to, since you can these days capture.
They can be living documents. And they are also sometimes very revelatory of human interaction, and in a good way. And you'll see that some people are, I am a natural critic. I look at an idea, and my first reaction is to say why it won't work. That's just the way my brain works. I try to control it, and that's okay. And then there are other people who are always up here, 30,000 feet, and other people who are right down, like, okay, well, what are we going to do right now? So that's one of the advantages, is that this captures all of these different perspectives, so you don't have, I don't know, the most annoying thing for me as a past focused person is to sit in a room with a bunch of visionaries, because they just make me nuts. But this is no. It's just, oh my God, I just want to pay attention. Yeah. But it's a very useful way to get past some of those human barriers, because it's on paper, so it's a much less sort of invasive way of dealing with personalities. So just one more thought to leave you with. And with that, I think we're done with conversation mapping for now.
Yes. Alrighty, so the next thing we're going to talk about, which I hope is fun, we're going to talk about session 6. Session 6, you are almost there. It's November the 16th. And there are